Right, let's start. Welcome to this session. Thanks so much for coming all the way to Salviati and to the archives. And would like to, even though nobody is here, would like to thank the archives for hosting us. It was a particularly challenging day to find a room where to have the session. So, but I think, you know, we ended up in a very nice context and very apt to what we are going to talk. So as you will see, the archives will come into our session. I'm Federica Signoriello. I'm the History Information Specialist for the library. It means that I liaise with the History Department. And I'm here with my colleague, Thomas Burke, who is the Economics Information Specialist. And we are here to talk about data management planning for qualitative data and ancillary research material. I would like to say something before we start. This is a session that is supposed to tell you about the basics. So I'm going to show you what we're going to talk about because I saw from the participants here in this room and online are very different. We have SDG fellows, Fernand Braudel fellows, Max Weber fellows, but also history researchers, SPS researchers, and law researchers. So you can imagine you all have very, very different needs. And so I try to be as broad as possible. I hope to offer a session for historians because that's my subject, but any request that comes our way, we try to adapt our presentations. And if I'm talking to the various categories. If you have any particular needs for a new session, we'll be happy to see what we can do. And also, I know that there is somebody here who is not at the EUI, who's a temporary a visiting fellow, a visiting student. And there is also somebody who's a host in this session. We are going to talk about, welcome, by the way. We're going to talk about data management in general, data management for qualitative data, and at the end, how we manage this at the EUI. This is relevant for the EUI, but you should know that in other universities, data is managed in a similar way. So if you have to translate this information into another institution, it will be probably very similar. So I think it's useful if you stay until the end. So I will start. Let's see if I can make it start. Okay. Oh, I didn't expect this animation. In today's session, we're going to cover the following subjects. So get ready for what is coming. What is research data? Structured and unstructured data. Don't get scared. Research data management plans, the EUI services for data management, and repositing data at the EUI. So we are not going to take the full 2 hours, I think. I think it's good news for you. 2 hours is a really long time. So let's get started with the question, what is research data? So research data is any information that has been collected, observed, generated, or created to validate research. It's basically anything by this definition. But since nowadays we work with digital material, we produce files mainly, even when we work with something physical, which is happening less and less, we generate files anyway because we end up digitizing photographs, we end up digitizing material so that we can keep it always with us. I have another definition, which is also very broad, but research data is the collection of files that support your research project. Okay, I'm going to explain to you now. We are here because we are concerned with qualitative data more than quantitative data. But I don't want you to think about this distinction too much because it's a false distinction. When we talk about data, we don't talk about research. So as you perfectly know, I'm sure, you have qualitative research and quantitative research and methods. And depending on what you do, you fall into one of these two categories. When it comes to data, the distinction really is not anymore qualitative or quantitative, is structured and unstructured. Because even if you do qualitative research, which is probably your case because you came to this session, you might generate structured data, which is usually considered quantitative. And I'm going to show you now what I mean. But this distinction is very important so that you know what to do with your data, okay? So I have prepared this, a few examples, not many, of structured data. First, which is the easiest, I think. It contains measurable numeric values such as numbers, dates, and times. It can include characters and non-numeric data, but these are always stored as encoded strings. So they are tags, the strings, they make sense in a numeric way. And I took this example. I have to read what it is because it's very peculiar. This is the latest data set that was reposited at the EUI by a history researcher. So qualitative research, but what he did was to reposit this data set that covers the cotton and rice exports from Maranhão, Brazil, in the 18th century. So very historical data, I would say, but he created series. He has numbers, you know, the probably the kilos, I don't know, of the quantities, let's say, of cotton exported, of rice exported. And then this is just a very small snapshot. So the data set is much larger. But, you know, he quoted the source where he took this data, which could be a manuscript, could be a book, but always in a consistent way. This makes it a very structured data set, and this is structured data. So I chose an historical example to show you that, you know, qualitative data can generate structured data, qualitative research, I'm sorry, can generate structured data. There is a new category that I haven't told you about, which is semi-structured data. So it's in between structured and unstructured. Semi-structured does not conform to a data model, but it has some structure. It lacks a fixed or rigid schema. It does not reside in a database, so it doesn't have characteristics that lets it be in a database per se, but these data sets have some organizational properties that make it easier to analyze. So I took this example. I made the mistake of not writing down what it was, and I cannot find it anymore, but I'll tell you where I took it from. And I think this is a perfect example of unstructured metadata. So when you are doing some research, which is historical, social, and you need to pin down geographical coordinates, and you put them in a spreadsheet, and this is quantitative data, obviously, as like the numbers, and they're very obviously structured. But then in the same spreadsheet, you have for each coordinate a description which is discursive. Then you have a little bit of numeric data and a little bit of discursive, let's say, data of text. So, for instance, I saw data sets with, I took this and because I couldn't take the one that I had in mind, but for instance, there's somebody I know who's doing a research about wax shops in Renaissance Florence, and she's using geographical coordinates to use them in GIS software, so to visualize them on a map. But in her spreadsheet, she had all these coordinates, but for each shop, which is determined by coordinates, she had a description which was very varied. So this shop was active from this date to this date, this kind of figurines, of illustrations, of da-da-da-da. So this is a bit of a mix. I took this this data set. As I anticipated, I wanted to show you where I took it from. I'll leave the presentation for a second. From this website, which you might find useful. And by the way, I'm going to give the presentation when we finish. I'm going to give you the links when we finish, so don't, just enjoy and you don't have to write down anything. If you think that this is useful, the Harvard Dataverse is a free data repository, obviously managed by Harvard University. And you can deposit here your data for free. And this is a great example, a great place where you can find examples of data sets if you are confused, if you're curious about, what kind of data sets people reposit in the arts and humanities, what kind of metadata they put. We're going to, all this information later, but I find it useful to browse this Dataverse because I find it so interesting and so full of examples. So I thought it would be useful to you as well. Going back to our presentation, the last kind of data is obviously unstructured data. And as the word says, unstructured data is the data that lacks any predefined format or model. So, and I think this is what is of interest to you mainly, video and voice recordings, questionnaires, any kind of text, so transcribed documents, transcribed letters, text files, even spreadsheets. If it's something in the spreadsheet, doesn't mean that it's a numeric data, as we have just seen, photographs and slides, anything that doesn't conform to a schema. I am very curious to know what kind of data you're dealing with. So if you want to write down this, this link, there is a Jamboard at the other end, and you can join anonymously. If you like to tell me what kind of data you're dealing with, this would be very useful, for the library to organize future trainings, or simply to know what we will deal with in a while. Your data set might have some kind of requirement, something special. So it's just useful information. I'm just also going to paste it in the chat if I manage. And the chat is here. Sorry. I'll take a small break from talking. Oh, I see messages in the chat, but I will share all the links later, Benno. So, oh, this link. So anyway, yeah, that's what I was doing. Let me close the chat. Let me open again. I didn't hear you. Yeah, at this link. And I'm one document about respiration and homeostasis lab. Oh, no, I don't even know what that is. Let me.
In my case, it's right on the I only have view on the access.
Okay. So, okay, let's take a very short break and I'll fix this. Sorry,
In my case, it's transfers me to the app.
To the
Application.
To the Jamboard application.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I have this thing. Viewer, maybe, yeah. Down there.
Yeah, but okay. Editor. Sorry, I didn't realize. I used this before. I didn't realize that. I forgot. So probably where you got to was a some kind of very similar link for some other project. I'm sorry. Okay, so there you go. This is the Jamboard, and you should be able to. Okay. But, all right. sorry. What you see is not what I see on my laptop, and I have to move around menus. Okay, I think I'm done. So coming to research data management, once we know what data is, and we know that we will eventually produce data, or we're already producing data for our project, research data management is the organization, storage, and preservation of data created during a research project. So it roughly covers, and we're going into depth with this, planning how your data will be looked after, which is, I think, the highest priority. How you deal with information on a day-to-day basis. So you make a plan for how you're going to use your data and keep it safe and keep it consistent. And what happens to data in the longer term. So eventually, what do you want to do with this data? And how do you want other people to use it if this is the case? Yeah, it doesn't go. Okay. The benefits for your research when you do research data management, when you get into this, is that you plan in advance, what you need. You improve the integrity of data, and you avoid data loss, and you allow the right access to the right people. I know that this seems like a lot of work, and I agree, it is a lot of work. But if you think of I don't know, interviews that you're recording, and with a lot of effort, you're going around Europe maybe, or you're transcribing you know, thousands of words of archival letters, or you cannot keep all these files in just one place. You have to think about how you're going to store them, where to find them. Something that happens to me a lot is I don't know where to put stuff. So if you plan it in advance, and if you do it in a consistent way, then you really avoid data loss. And when you're working on a project for a few years, I guarantee that will happen if you are not organized. And allowing the right access to the right people is a matter of sharing your data with your research partners, if you have any. If you're doing a PhD on your own, probably it won't be a problem, unless maybe your supervisor wants to check stuff. So you need to create a folder with the the right permission. So you need to say somewhere, I have a folder with this kind of material, and it's shared between me and my supervisor. And it happened to me. So for my master's degree, I had to put everything in a folder where my supervisor could check it. So this is also part of the planning. Planning long-term preservation, as I said. I'm repeating myself a lot, but I want some concepts to really sink in. And learning, and one of the benefits of doing research data management for your project early on, so during your PhD or your postdoc, is you learn actually research data management. And research data management is required by funders. So if you will eventually be part of a Horizon project or any kind of project financed by a big agency, they will ask you to write a data management plan, and they're going to ask you what you're going to do with your data, how you're going to share your data. So the sooner you learn this, the better. And also, data repositing is required by publishers. So again, if you publish an article and you quote the interviews that you used in your project, and you submit it to a journal, journals are asking more and more to provide a link to your data set, because you have to prove that your data is real. You haven't made it up. So it doesn't happen with every journal, but it's happening more and more. And there will be a link. I'm going to tell you in a bit. So what we're going to talk about now, and we're going to see this a bit in depth, is data management plan. By the way, if you have questions, stop me. I'm going to check the chat in a second. Oh yes, this is still about. Did you manage to write on the board? So I think it works now. So if you have questions, please interrupt me. A data management plan describes the data that you will collect during your research and how it will be managed, both during and after the project. This is the definition of a data management plan. Creating a data management plan at the start of your research. So I strongly recommend it at the beginning of your PhD or during your second year, when you have more of an idea of what you're doing, will help you organize your data, keeping it safe, again, and ensuring access to those who need it. And it can also, like making a plan, it can also highlight data management issues that may arise during the course of your research. Of course, if you think about it in advance, you will find issues. I don't know why it never goes. I have to click a few times. Oh, okay. There are 5 sections roughly in a data management plan. Should I say at the very before I go into every section of the data management plan, I would like to also to say that if you have a very straightforward project, it won't take you long to write one. It doesn't have to be a document that is 10 pages long. Sometimes it's 2 pages, sometimes it's 3. As long as you try to think of any possible outcome for each section. So it's not I'm saying this because I don't want to scare you. It's not like an official document. It's not requested at the EUI actually, or it is only for funding. Yes. This is why I say don't get scared. It's a document that is really of help for your own use, and then, well, it gets difficult when it's required for funding, obviously, because you have to guarantee a series of steps. But I'm thinking of your small projects of your PhDs. First of all, every data management plan has an overview of the research project. Well, you should already have it. I think you know what you're doing. You provide an overview of the research project, and you think about the types of data being collected, generated, processed, and used. This is just an introduction, so it's just a general overview of what kind of data you're going to use. Then, right. In the second section, you go more into depth and you see what kind of data outputs you're going to have. Data outputs means formats, right? It's really are you producing audio files, video files, Excel sheets? Then you distinguish between data which will not be shared and data which needs repositing. So you might create a spreadsheet for your own use, and you know that it will be very important to you, but at the end of the project, it's not relevant to include it for the reader, for the examiners of your PhD. So of course this will change in due course during your project, but at least you get an idea at the beginning of what you want to keep and what it's for your own use. And describe data quality assurance processes. This is more of a requirement for funding, I think.
Yeah, it is. But it's also good practice to think about later on when people ask you about your inputs, anything that went into your evidence or your primary material, your thesis, your article, your book. Make sure that there is some kind of quality control, because with the so-called digital humanities, there is a vast amount of digital material there, and it's important to use language about quality control, about quality data inputs, that you have verified that an archive or a website which has digitized material has in fact done full series, for example, but it is complete, integral, all of the things that those of you who are doing more historical work from good archival practice, knowing that the inputs are quality inputs. And it has been a little bit of a challenge in the digital humanities because we're far away. frequently from who has digitized something, you know, and so keep an eye on the quality of what goes into the work, yeah, and also quality in terms of, yeah, as Federica says, the formats, the structures, and the documentation and code if you need it. That very first example from Brazil would need a code book for units of measure and things like that. And all of that is broadly under quality assurance. And there's a lot of language about this now, sometimes in evaluations of theses, referees' reports for articles. You know, does it seem that there has been a rigorous approach to collection and verification and all of that? In economics, it's also about replication, but you don't really use that so much in the humanities because there is a cultural subjectivity and it's located in a language or something like that. So replication is a little bit more formal, but certainly that quality assurance is something that referees and Viva committees and so forth are very interested in.
Yeah, but for like data that is collected over a long period of time, it's like removing obsolete information and making sure there are no inconsistencies. So
consistency and completeness is very important, because you may go to an archive and there may be gaps. We get this in economics. You may think the World Bank, the IMF don't have this problem. They do, even for data from 10 years ago. So there are different approaches to the famous NA or blank or dash, or even sometimes zero, which is a value in quantitative data. So talk to your supervisor or your referee, your co-authors, or a professor or an expert on the more academic side of what to do when something is missing. For example, if that gentleman who did the Brazilian data had an end point of 1820, but wanted to go to 1890 because there were important events, you know, affecting trade, then a discussion would have to happen whether it was really essential to continue and find the data somewhere else, or to stop the end point of the study in the 1820, for example. So you get into the scope of the study there, but completeness, consistency, and then you can say, look, the data wasn't available, the study ends there, no problem. Some studies are only 1 year, but as long as you're cognizant of that, you'll have no problem.
There was a question, yeah.
Yeah, so I understand the notion of data qualitative process for archives and databases, but I'm struggling to translate this to, say, interview data or something, you know, which are like social scientific,
of course.
qualitative data.
So I'm just going to repeat, because the people, there is no mic, so your voice doesn't get projected. So yeah, what is data quality assurance, data quality assurance process in a more qualitative project with interviews and this kind of unstructured data.
Yes, I think here what's very important is that you look at the standard advice of the domain, that, as the Americans say, the discipline or the subdiscipline. In ethnography, for example, consistency is incredibly important. There was a study here of somebody who went to a refugee camp in some part of the Middle East, and had done many ethnographic interviews. Now there needs to be a note, a methodological note, saying how the subjects were selected. Is this random? Is it the people who are available? Was it everybody, which is a kind of scientific completeness? Was it males only? In fact, it was. Were they a certain age band? Yeah. So for the interviews, those are important. Then structured interviews would be slightly different to conversational ethnographic interviews. So structured interviews, you'd have to be sure that the same structure was used for all of the participants, which doesn't exclude unstructured, as Federica said, information coming from the participants in gaps in the structured parts of the questions. Okay, that's an example of that. But what I would advise you, because I'm not an expert, it's more ethnographic. What we've noticed is that historians are using these methods more, and sociologists are using this ethnoanthropological approach a little bit more,
and lawyers,
and lawyers, yes. And so they're not exactly structural things, but they're sort of like, think of it as a sort of a checklist. How did I select the sample? You interviewed 20 people. Where did you get the 20 people? Is that a full set? Is it a women's football team with substitutes? You know, that's the full thing. Is it 20 out of 100? Why did you pick those 20? Is it because of age, sex, religion, whatever else? Yeah. So there are things we can do about the selection, which is at the start of the completeness of the quality control. Then the quality control of the activity itself, which is the interview or the video, etc. Space for them to speak as well as answer and be interrogated, as it were. All of those things, and you'll find more on that in any of the domain which your professors and advisors know, the domains for ethnography, anthropology, sociology, sometimes on the edges of linguistics, social psychology, all of those associations, European, American, British, Australian, Chinese, Japanese, will have guidelines for that, not least because of the data protection, which Federica will mention as well.
Thanks.
All right. Then I don't know why the titles come second, but third part, resources required for data collection, generation, processing, and use. Of course, if you think about it, you think about your data collection in advance, you think about what you need. So, well, you provide a description for data collection, generation, processing, use. And once you have that described, then you know the technical and research assistance requirements that you will need. Do you need? I'm being very disingenuous here, but do you need a recorder? Do you need a hard drive? Do you need Microsoft Excel in your PC? This is the very basics, but then you need NVivo to code your interviews. Do you need Amber script to transcribe your audio interviews, etc. So I'll go to the fourth stage, data security, infrastructure, and protocols. As this sounds very very scary from a point of view of, you know, what do you have to know? It's not much if you have a personal project, a PhD project. You have to know more if you have a funded project. Of course, you have to guarantee levels of security. But if you think about your personal project, it's as easy as thinking of data storage. The thing that I mentioned earlier, it's very useful to have, for instance, a storage that is on a hard drive and then one that is online in a protected environment, for instance, a hard drive and OneDrive, so that if your hard drive dies, you always have OneDrive. If OneDrive dies for any reason, if there is a power outage, there is a server outage, you always have your hard drive. So you have to write this. So I'm going to keep, so that you do it every time, you know, you collect an interview or a data set, or not a data set, a new series of information. You save it on both. File naming, as I said, one of the things that happens to me a lot is that I don't find stuff. But if you have a consistent way to name your files with a code, the date of the interview, for instance, national codes, this is what I used a lot, then at least you create your own system, and you know, if you don't remember where you put your things, at least you know how to find them. Backup of data is, well, what I just mentioned is data storage, and the frequency of backup. Also make an effort in deciding how much you're going to back, how often you are going to back up your data for, and then long-term storage. We'll go to that at the end of the presentation, where the data that you decide to keep, the data that will be officially part of your project, that you want your examiners to see, that you want to be clearly identified in a storage. What is it, and where are you going to put it? And then there are standard descriptions of data security, infrastructure, and protocols that we can give you if they're needed, especially if they're needed from an external third party, then we can provide that for you. the last but very, very important part of a data management plan is ethical considerations, because especially if you're dealing with qualitative data, 90% of the times you're dealing with human participants. So you are interviewing people, or you are going to use their data. I don't know, you're reading their letters, or simply you're using data that is sensitive, even though you don't have a direct contact with them. So what you should really do, and I'm going to show you this because this is so important. You have to go to the EUI ethics committee and request an ethics review. You have to do this at the beginning of your project, because in the ethics review, you say how you're going to, and this is why it's relevant for data. You say how you're going to manage the data that involves human subjects, okay? And how you're going to take care of it, how you're going to protect these people. And let me get out of the presentation for a second so I can show you this. This is, I've got some answers. This is very exciting. On the EUI website, this is out of our remit in this presentation, you know, but it's so important because when you have data that deals with human subjects, you need to, if you want to put it anywhere, if you want to deal with it at all, you need to make sure that you comply to the to your ethics review, and this has to be approved by the EUI ethics committee. So as you can see, if you go to Services and Admin, Dean of Graduate Studies Ethics Review, you can Google this, it's very easy to find. There is a whole process that is described in these pages, and there is an online portal where you can submit your project, and it has to be approved before you start collecting data. Well, it's taking a long time, but trust me, because it worked this morning. Anyway, it takes you to a form, and I'll show you later where to find more information. But once you have the approval, once you've established how you're going to manage this data, this goes into your data management plan. The second option is if you're using material that is already taken from some other source, some other database, and you have to make sure that you comply to copyright. So if this material is copyrighted, but you want to include it in your data set, you have to make sure that you can. This is it. So if you're scanning photos, works of art, manuscripts, you name it, probably there's some copyright that belongs to someone, and you need to take care of that. So these are the 5 main sections of data management plan. And I know it doesn't look good, it looks complicated and difficult, but there are tools online that you can use. And these are just 3 that we know about. You know, just browse around the web and see what suits your needs. I can show you this, the DMP online, because I find it a nice tool, and I've used it in the past. So it's free. You can create an account. Our institution doesn't subscribe to this portal, but you can, when you are inserting your data, you're registering, you just put other as institution, and it doesn't create any problem. And I'll just show you what it looks like. So this is my test project. I did use it for another project with another email, so, but that was it contains sensitive data, so I couldn't show you. And if you go to write plan, you see section by section, you can go to each one, and this window on the right helps you, reminding you of all the questions that you have to ask yourself. So have you gained consent for data preservation and sharing? How will you protect the identity of the participants inquired? And you just reply point by point in your own words. It's fine. As I said, I find it very useful because it's section by section. It's very easy to use, and I think you can export this eventually as a Word
Text,
document.
PDF, or Word, or
Yeah.
simple text, or yeah.
So this is one of the tools. I will pass you the links of the others. So it doesn't, it doesn't have to be difficult. You can use these tools online. What happens at the EUI? So again, you're not, all this sounds difficult, but you have guides that you can follow. And I suggest that you have a look at the research data guide that is issued by the EUI Library and is written by Thomas. It's updated every year. And the Code of Ethics in Academic Research that is issued by the Ethics Committee at the EUI. Again, I'll show you where to find those because they are quite important. So the first one is, as I said, is issued by the library. So if you go to the library website, it's this last link on the right at the top, Research Data Services. In the Research Data Services, you find so much information. You can spend hours here, and it's curated always by my colleague Tom. There's a data portal where to find data. The data services and the EUI research data. If you go to data services, well,
yeah, those links, those 10, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Data services is basically what's underneath, and this is the research data guide that you see that I showed you earlier. You can download it as a PDF, or you can consult it on this web page, and it's hyperlinked, and there is basically everything. And as you can see, there is everything that concerns data discovery, generation, data management plans. More information, more than what I told you. You can find it in the third section of the research data guide, etc., etc. So there is also a section on qualitative data in the humanities and social sciences. You can go and have a look. It's very complete. And the other one, I'll just leave it here for the moment. The Code of Ethics in Academic Research is another PDF, and it's also updated every year with the guidance that you need to complete an ethics review. Okay.
Legal office.
Yes, and it's issued, by the legal office at the EUI. So it's not the library anymore, although, as you can see, there are constant exchanges between us because we deal with similar things. Going back, sorry. Then, where do you keep your data for the long term at the EUI? And may I introduce you to Cadmus if you don't know it yet. Cadmus is the EUI research repository. Every university has one nowadays. So Cadmus is the name that we gave to ours because it's the brother of Europa. So we wanted to keep a Europe theme. Cadmus collects and provides access to scholarly publications and research data. And basically what it does, it's a place where we have all the publications and the data sets produced by EUI members during their permanence here. Okay, so all the journal articles, books, book chapters, working papers, and data sets are kept in Cadmus. The Cadmus research data collection is the youngest of the whole repository, and it was launched in 2019. Before I go on with the presentation, I just want to show you what Cadmus looks like, because it's cadmus.ui.eu. You find it linked from everywhere from the UI website. And as I said, it collects all the outputs. So it's divided in collections. You can search it. You can see the latest editions. You can search by academic unit. And right here we have UI research data, which is also divided into collections. And I'll show you the youngest collection, which is the history with 2 data sets, and one of them is the one that I showed you earlier. But as I said, you can you can browse them and see what you find. What you reposit in Cadmus are structured quantitative data sets and structured or semi-structured qualitative data sets not requiring embargo or access control. So it means that if you create a structured or semi-structured data set that can be open access, so doesn't contain any sensitive data, and so anyone can look at it, just going on Cadmus from anywhere in the world, clicking on your data set, they download your Excel file and it's fine because you don't have to protect anyone, then it can go into Cadmus. Otherwise, for the other kind of data, as I said, it's very important that you do the ethics review, and then in the ethics review, you will agree a certain degree of security that you guarantee for your data, depending on the sensitivity of the information that you hold. So this implies that not all data can be openly shared, and this can be because you have, as I said, you have human participants, so you want to protect their privacy, or the case that I mentioned earlier, you have taken files, or you have digitized items that are under copyright. So there are intellectual property rights, and so you want to create a data set, but it doesn't have to be open to anyone because you risk copyright to breach copyright in any way. So you cannot share your data. Or the third case, it might jeopardize the main project's objectives. I don't know what case this could be, but anything that puts at risk your project if you make it open. So what happens if you need to reposit data that cannot be in Cadmus and cannot be open? These are the cases that I just mentioned. So for the outputs that require higher levels of secure archivings and access control, we have reached an agreement with the historical archives of the European Union, so where we are at this very moment, and we are going to we already started a collaboration with them to reposit this kind of sensitive data in their archives, so that we can meet the security requirements that are needed, and access to some of these materials can be highly restricted. So you tell us then what kind of security you want to implement on this data. You want them closed forever? This is an option. You want only people coming physically to the archives to consult the data after they sign non-disclosure form? This is possible. You want them to just, I don't know, fill the form online. I'm just making hypotheses here, but the archives this collaboration between the archives and the library guarantees the security that is needed. The presentation is finished. What I wanted to say is that we've been working with the archives for the past few months on some metadata schema that you can follow for when you reposit your data, and in particular for audio files and video files, so that eventually by the end of this year we will have it online, and you will know when you want to reposit a data set that needs to be needs to have this kind of restrictions. Other than the files, what kind of metadata, so the description of these files, what kind of information we need to put these files into the repository. Otherwise, I forgot to show you because I had my notes, but I didn't look at them. If you have structured or semi-structured data set that you can reposit in Cadmus because it doesn't need to be closed. Let's go back to Cadmus. The way to let us know that you have a data set that you want to reposit in Cadmus is to go to this link and then you can submit a publication. So eventually when you publish an article, you're still at the EUI and you want to reposit it into Cadmus, this is what you need to do. If you want to reposit a data set, then you go to this other section and you use this form, which will load in a few seconds, but there you go. So we are getting ready for qualitative unstructured data sets. The pilot data set is going to be reposited in a couple of weeks. So we know we are testing, this new system, but for structured and semi-structured data, we are ready, and we have been for years now. So, is there anything I forgot?
No, I think that's incredibly comprehensive. One thing that might help you, the historians, political scientists, sociologists, STG, is for us just to read those headings of the, if you scroll down slowly on the form, go back one, back to where you were.
Cadmus.
That's the submission form.
I lost it. Wait.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. I'll do it again.
That's it, on the right. Well, it's good for them to see it a second time, because this gives you an idea of, what we ask, and the archives with Federica, because Federica and the archives will be handling your qualitative data sets, and myself and Simone, another colleague, and Lotte will be handling the more quantitative ones. But there's a very big overlap. And at the moment, what we're asking, and we'll ask something very similar for the metadata for the archives.
Yeah.
And those of you who work, say, with a catalog, the British Library catalog, the ZBW German catalog, will know that you have name, submitter, principal, investigator, EUI email. Why? Because it's an institutional repository. Your article, working paper, technical paper, chapter, book, thesis must be the output, as one of Federica's slides showed, of an output during a period here. Yeah. So we need at least one of the co-creators, if there are many co-creators, must be a member of the EUI. Simple things like this, which is these things are worth keeping in mind during the research, not just when you come to us at the end. Some of them you might have to recreate. For example, we have year of completion of the data set, which could be, for history, is absolutely going to be different from the date of the last observation. Yeah, description of the data set will evolve over time. So starting in your first or certainly second year of a PhD, and if it's an article, you need to do it all the time from the beginning. Keep a description evolving based on sources. You see the next one there, sources. So these are very small sources of data. That's incredibly important, because as historians, as Nelris also and others, and sociologists as well, political scientists, there are multiple sources. Even in economics, sometimes people take a small table from the Wall Street Journal and they forget about it. This enriches your bibliography at the end. It's nice to have multiple sources. It's a form of, going back to quality control, it's a form of multiple kind of confirmation of an historical trend, for example. Date range is different from date. Geographical, format of data, number of data files. And in the humanities, that tends to be very flat. It tends to be more hierarchical in political science and economics. What I mean by flat is you might have 1,000 photocopies of letters from the 18th century. That's a very flat, you'd have, a top file, a top dossier, and 1,000 flats. Well, there might be something more hierarchical for something more administrative in political science, but it could be in history as well. Code book, supporting documentation, even if you don't have a code book, supporting documentation, updated throughout the project. Because otherwise what's going to happen is at the very end, when we ask for these things, and this is what we mean by sort of, these funders talk about good practice, quality control, they use that kind of language now. Keeping documentation, a notebook during the thing, the same way as you keep a bibliography, because you will forget things. We forget things all the time. Access status will help you. It will help you at all of these things, like license or something like that. Related publication will link to your publication, and future work. You can say we intend to repeat this. That's if it's a survey. Interviews would be a good example. And is there a copy of the data set somewhere else? You can put it somewhere else, like as Federica said, in the Dataverse. And also here, that is absolutely possible. So, at the end, we'll ask you for those things, But it's nice, as it were, to start thinking in these terms, as you do. I mean, I think you do implicitly or subconsciously, but all these funders and even all these procedures that we now have for the PhD require that these things are explicit and in some way documented. So the documentation doesn't have to be very long. The DMP's 2 pages is fine, 1.5 pages. But it's nice to have that because it will enrich your bibliography. The data section or archive description section in your bibliography, which in a history thesis probably in the 2nd chapter or the 2nd part of the 1st chapter. And certainly at the end, a very nice data note or note on the sources, on the evidence, primary material. So metadata is data about data, and in the archives, Federica and the archivists are working on a modification of this, but it won't be very, 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 very different. There will be, is it an audio file, is it a video file, and then maybe some examples of those formats. And but start thinking about the end, you know, not already at the beginning, but certainly as the study is taking shape for the PhD at the end of the 2nd year, maybe for an article a lot earlier, it's a shorter work, then you know you'll have no problem with the metadata.
Oh, and something that it's important to mention is that once you reposit your data, either in Cadmus or eventually into the archives, is that your data set will have a link, so a digital object identifier. So you can even be quoted, you know, cited by somebody else. So it's this is a very important incentive. So if you don't do it for, you know, for your own sake, do it for this, because you can actually increase the times you're cited because somebody is using your data set to do something, you know, some other kind of research, and it ends up being a quotation, just like an article or a book chapter.
Exactly. It's an incredibly important point. The National Sciences Foundation in the United States is discussing the very complex matter of data sets for tenure, the credit for data sets that are quoted for tenure. It's difficult because sometimes it's hard to say how much is a simple restatement of something in an archive or a restatement of Bloomberg data from a financial database and how much is elaborated. They're arguing about what does elaboration value added mean. But in the future, certainly your young scholars, there will be full credit. And as Federica said, if it's on a random website or it's not systematically quoted or locatable, then you get less impact. And from the data set, you can point over to the publication and vice versa. Yes. It gets you some traffic.
But this is very, very important. Yeah. So I think we said everything. Yeah. If you have questions, or also if you want to type in questions or open your mic, I don't know what we can hear, but I'm sure we can hear next to the laptop. It's a lot to take in, so I understand that you might have questions, you know, in the future. Yeah.
I'm really this was really interesting. Thank you. So I'm trying to think through how exactly I would do all of this. I was wondering if you could speak maybe a bit more to the use of, you know, IT tools. For example, I got a Max EUI license from the library. I haven't really started using it yet, and I realized that's a whole other course. But to what extent does data management take place in these tools, for example? So my idea was, okay, so Max EUI will be my already set data collection, data storage, data management point thing. To what extent is that a good idea or a bad idea? You know,
Yeah. So the question is about additional, I'm repeating, additional software such as MaxQDA, because we have a law researcher here, right? Who's no, I know, and you mentioned MaxQDA, so I'm explaining that in a second. So like planning to use MaxQDA to manage the files and probably the interviews that you're going to do. So MaxQDA is QDA stands for qualitative data analysis, and it's a software. And some of you might know an alternative to it called NVivo, and another one is Atlas. And well, there is a thousand more, but these are the ones that come to mind now. And basically, they're used to analyze large bodies of text, assign tags so that you eventually, well, code, I say tags because they're understandable by everyone, but they assign codes to the text, and then with those codes you can, depending on the methodology that you're using, you can do things and decide, you know, how to use them in your research. I didn't know that you confess my ignorance, because I never opened MaxQDA. I used NVivo. I didn't know you could manage files in MaxQDA. And this kind of software at the moment at the EUI is a bit of a problem, because, and this is how I know that you're a law researcher, because we don't have institutional license for qualitative data analysis software. And there is just MaxQDA offered to law researchers and SPS researchers, but no NVivo. So I'm ready, you know, on this kind of subject. So I don't know. You should check, I think, if there is a possibility to manage files inside the software. You should check what kind of security it offers. Because if it's only, let's say it stores, I'm just making a hypothesis, it's a software that in addition to the analysis, it also stores your interviews, your audio files and your text files on their server, let's say. I wouldn't think that that's enough. It needs to be backed up. You need to have those files somewhere else, and you need to, you know, prepare for that. In the case that MaxQDA offers maximum security and, you know, can be used with most sensitive data because it backs it up in 1 million servers, then I would say go for it, as long as you're aware of what you're doing, and then as long as you can retrieve the files where in case, you know, anything happens. But I wouldn't keep them online only, for instance, if it's if that's the case. Yeah.
So I did just get through the ethics review. I told them I was going to use MaxQDA. There was no comment, so I guess it's considered secure. It's locally stored to a central MaxQDA project file, if I understand this correctly. At the end user for data management. Currently, it's so less of well for all. So a comprehensive solution for your qualitative data, but I think it probably makes sense. It's also the
yeah, no, exactly. I mean, so I'm just repeating what you just said for people listening from Zoom. So MaxQDA apparently offers, you know, security in this kind of context. So it would be enough. I would think it would be enough. But if you if for an extra layer of security, you think that also backing it up on OneDrive or your hard drive, it's something more, then do it and keep it in your, you know, data management plan. Yes, sometimes one of the things that we should consider is that sometimes software just some platforms just shut down. Or, you know, all of a sudden, and without not without warning, but then you might have a large body of files that you have to save in a rush. And I'm thinking of EndNote, which is something completely unrelated, but it's still a platform where you can also save files for your research. And they're closing down. And they just announced it. Maybe it's not EndNote, but it's something similar. So they announced it and they said, we're closing down in a week. Okay, what do I do with all my files? What if you don't read this alert? What happens? Because you're on holiday, or, you know, you're just doing something else. So it's good to back up on your own.
No, these are very, very good points. I think for the tools, maybe one of the reasons they didn't mention anything or give feedback from the ethics was that let's not confuse the obligations for so-called ethical research and the protection of persons, households, individuals, and their identities and opinions, etc., with the tools. The responsibility for that is with the researcher. So if you're using Excel, if you're using MaxQDA, if you're using anything else, you're still responsible for making sure that those recording files and then the transcription files that MaxQDA can do that you are compliant with your obligations not to have collected via the platform or stores, which is processing and GDPR processing, something which has not been approved by the ethics committee. Okay, so it resides more with you, not with the tool. The tool, Max QDA, is in Berlin, so they say they are, and we believe they are, and if they're not, they could be sued and by the commission itself. They are GDPR compliant. What tends to happen with American, Canadian, Japanese companies is that they find an office, usually in Amsterdam, Dublin, somewhere like that. So they are also compliant. But I think move the focus a little bit. It's a good product. I mean, from the platform, which is in a sense a neutral empty box, to the what are you using it for? What are you processing? Is it sensitive? So we have a list on the data guide of what is sensitive: union membership, political opinions, all of this health, biomarkers, history of relationships, something like that. We kind of know common sense, but it's in the legal officer's guide as well. So we're using a tool. It could be something very simple, like you're transcribing quick answers into an Excel. You're using Excel. So Excel is the box. So think of this from the point of view of the author, which is you, conducting an interview or some other thing, and the subjects, the human subjects, not really the technology so much. Federica is absolutely right. The language that is used for elaborating data, as we say in economics, is processing, the processing of personal data, right? That's probably going to be done a little bit off the platform, certainly the output files. You know, the aggregate output files will be coming out of the system. Yeah, so they will need to be stored very carefully, etc. And you may want to keep a very safe copy of those. And yes, companies, it's a very good point. Companies go bankrupt. Max QDA is a private company. So you would keep those, but all of it is processing. You know, it's all processing. They changed the language in GDPR from the previous regulation, which is quite tough, was individuals, households, and families cannot be identified. They changed that to individuals, households, and families cannot be identifiable, which places the responsibility on the researcher to make sure nobody can root around the system or combine things, you know, to identify people. That's our responsibility. So GDPR kind of pushes a responsibility onto us to respect the human subjects. And the tools, yes, there are all these discussions. So come to us for the tools and the ICT service for the tools. And we'll talk about that. Laura Beajotti is the person who looks after the data protection from the technical point of view, the infrastructure nodes, all of that stuff that was in Federica's slide. And so we work with her on that. But keep a focus on yourself as the author, responsible author, and the human subjects, if you have human subjects. And the other category that Federica covered very well is copyright and database copyright, which could be the photographs of something generated by a museum themselves, rather than you getting permission to generate, which might be copyright free. Yeah. So those are the two big categories. And whatever system you're using, we should focus on protecting the identity of human subjects and being copyright compliant. And all archives that you walk into will have a policy on that. They'll be able to hand you, museums as well, will be able to hand you the policy on that.
You have to contact ICT because it's a software that is provided by ICT.
Yes, so
Yeah.
it's possible because I looked it up online and I was thinking like maybe I should get a trial free, but if you can just go to ICT and get it, it's just very, very good news.
Yes, I cannot guarantee, as I don't know what the procedure is exactly. I just know because somebody's asking about me at Max QDA. Yeah, I just know I had to investigate because somebody asked me for en vivo and we don't have it. So I know that there is only Max QDA for lawyers and for SPS. Then I think you should just email ICT and liaise with them.
Another clarification question about quality assurance, especially if you're looking at like documents online. how do you make sure that they post or publish everything? Like, I'm not the one doing that, I just kind of go to the website and I hope they're like due diligence is there, right?
Right.
Especially if, I mean, when it's something pretty regular, you can tell that, okay, there is a gap. But if it's, so I was working with public statements of like some international bureaucrat, and it really depends on like, is there a crisis happening, so they talk or not. So in which sense, like, I don't know if their office is doing like good job
Right.
putting everything on the website.
So somebody's asking about quality assurance for data that is provided by a third party. So how do you do that? Thomas, can you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question, because what you're saying is that it's easier with quantitative time series data to notice if something is missing than in a complex situation where a bureaucracy is issuing partial information, which may be because they want to put out a nice view of themselves. And, you know, there really is no simple answer to this. I think the best way to try and approach this is a multiplicity of sources and approaches. So there was a big debate in the United States about the closure of the Environmental Protection Agency libraries and the non-maintenance of certain public statements about the environment over the last 20 years. And I think what you have to ask in those cases is, in whose interest is it to also have this information? So it might be a farming group, it might be a public advocacy group, it might be a union, and it's painstaking. It's a bit like journalistic research, you know, investigative research. If it's a bureaucracy putting out information about, if we stick to that example, in the environment in Europe, and you have a sense that they're not doing very much or they're releasing partial information, then you have to say, what are the other potential sources, you know, for this? Is it a local environment protection agency? Is it a housing association? Is it a health body? You know, and you need to heterogenize your approach. This is very true in political science, because really, if a bureaucracy is not putting out all of its information, and I think no bureaucracy gives every piece of information, then you have to look at other sources where the public information may be required, other consumers, not just an academic consumer, yeah, of the information. So heterogenize your potential sources. And of course, that is very qualitative research, because it's not easy to quantify. You know, the ancient maximum that not everything that can be counted is of value, and not everything of value can be counted. Now, your question is in the second category. It could be very, very important that what is not said. So you have to really rely on a historian's narrative approach, or a sociologist's narrative approach, or a political science narrative approach, to try and move towards completeness. And that will be, in a sense, controversial. It will be discussed at your thesis board or an article committee. They'll say, well, it doesn't ring through, something is missing, or maybe there should have been another case study. But try and think, in who else's interest is it to have these observations? Yeah, and I think that really helps sometimes if you're dealing especially with public administration.
Right. And anyway, you mentioned your sources in your data management plan, so you've got your, you know, your bases covered, and you know, at least you declare what your sources are, and then if there is a gap in your sources, then you did the best you could do. Is there anything else? We're always, you know, open to questions, or you know, I put emails at the beginning of the presentation. If you Google us, you find us. We're always available.
And they can make a point also for the DMPs to be reviewed. The data management plans. If they write a draft, we can review.
Oh yes, of course. If you want us to review your data management plan and see together if, you know, if there are any gaps or anything you can't quite think of, then we're very happy to do that. You find us at the library, you know that. Okay, so I don't
Any
see.
question in the chat?
No,
Oh,
no, those
Okay.
are old.
the
maybe.
old ones, yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes, yes.
But I kept an eye. So anyway, again, thanks for coming then.